Welcome, John. We've been a part of C now for a little while here and gotten to know him and really appreciate just all that he brings in a wealth of knowledge, background, filmmaking, crowdfunding, all sorts of information. And so really here to kind of talk about that today and just kind of get started, John. And if you want to share a little bit more about yourself and more details about kind of what all you do.
For sure. Thanks, Amy. I have, as Amy said, I'm a filmmaker, primarily cinematography, but I've started to wade into the directing and screenwriting pool a lot more in the past couple of years. I have crowdfunded multiple projects. Chrysalis was a zombie feature we did for about $35,000. Limerence was a very sort of high production value, very fantastical body horror drama weird thing that it's indescribable and wonderful, but we did that for $35,000 as well. So I've done two big campaigns and worked on a smattering of other ones as well over the years. And I teach at DePaul. I teach at Flashpoint, and in the fall I'll be teaching at Elmhurst University as well, so I'm super excited about that. So that's me in a nutshell, is teaching and filmmaking and parenting my three children as well.
Exactly. I want to go ahead and, if it's okay, I'm gonna if there's any questions, if you want to go ahead, and Ryan, if you've got questions, feel free to put in the chat or unmute, whatever you want to do and ask questions. Or I can also go through and ask questions and just, John, have you kind of talk through some of the big topics right now in those areas for students and people looking to get started with that. So, but Ryan, if you've got anything you want to ask right now, feel free to go ahead.
All right, thank you. Actually, one question I have is, because of the pandemic, how is it right now in terms of like trying to fit in filmmaking? Have you been more focused on teaching, or have you been trying to dabble back into filmmaking again during this pandemic?
It's been a little of both. So that's a cop out, I know, but I've been focused a lot on teaching, because teaching online classes, especially classes that are sort of a mixture of like synchronous, where you're meeting live, and asynchronous, where you pre-record stuff. My classes are sort of a hybrid of that. And so it's a lot of pre-recording lectures and finding new examples and making sure students have everything sort of organized and ready to go. And then prepping synchronous lectures and making sure I have a good grasp of all the technology, just to make sure that I'm not like isolating students unnecessarily through all that. So it's been a lot of my focus, is just kind of keeping up with that. But I'm also a filmmaker, and if I'm not making something, if I'm not being creative, it's like I'm not breathing. And so I need to be doing stuff. But the challenge, of course, with COVID is you have to plan for all of the contingencies and plan for all of the safety elements on set, even more than you would normally do. I mean, I've produced a lot as well, and producing is so much about making sure logistically you're keeping your crew safe and secure, and that they feel the comfort level on set that they need to, so they can not focus on those things and they can just do the creative work. And so part of what was challenging for me was, as I was in teaching these production classes and telling people these are the things you have to do, but also in a pandemic you have to do this and this and this and this, and having not done those things myself, I realized, well, I need to produce something during this time, just to make sure I can speak from a position of authority on, hey, this is what we did on set. So I directed a film in October, sort of almost at the height of the pandemic. I mean, it was ramping up October, November. And my friend Kate had written this very COVID capable script called Static Space. It was basically one person in a barn and talking to another person on a radio. So the other actor didn't even have to be on set. Just the two of them could talk, and we called her in on Zoom, and we did all these things. I mean, all sorts of weird logistic stuff. But there was still, even though it was a very small film, a very small crew, there was still a number of, we had a COVID compliance officer on set. We were, doing social distancing, which changed the focus of some of the camera angles we were able to get. We were all, masks, face shields, hand sanitizer, wiping down equipment on set every day. Our COVID officer mapped out traffic patterns with tape on the floor and what doors you could go in, what doors you could go out, spaced tables 6 feet apart. So when we were eating, we could eat, and still be in the same room. And we got lucky with our location. At Timberlake Playhouse is in Mount Carroll. That's like 2 hours west of here. But they had lodging, so like each crew member could stay in like their own cabin and not have to share with anybody. So it was just like, but all these things that you just suddenly have to think about is if we were doing that film normally, we would have done it with maybe a 15-person crew, and we would have slept 3 people to a bedroom, packing everybody in, and we could have gotten by with, we could have probably filmed faster because there's less considerations about how you set up the shot and stuff like that. COVID sort of changed all that, and it was a like probably a it was a 3.5-day shoot. It probably should have been 5, given how challenging it was to work around all those things. But we still did it, and it was still this thing of like, well, all these things that you're doing is making sure that we're all keeping each other safe, so it's not something that anyone has to be nervous about or concerned about, and we did all the other things we always do, in terms of having insurance and paying crew and taking care of mileage and all that sort of stuff. There's all the no-brainer things you do on a film set, but now it's all the added things that you have to do on top of that. And I think somebody said that the average budget increase, especially on bigger budget productions, like if you're doing like one of the Chicago TV shows or something like that, it's like 15 to 20% that you add to the budget on top of whatever the budget would have been, all because of COVID. Because either you're adding days to the shoot schedule, or you are reducing the number of hours per day, or you are, having another crew member like a COVID officer. There's more cleaning involved. There's just more of everything from a safety and just sanitation perspective. So there's been a lot of things there that have sort of changed that. I am not filming nearly as much as I used to in the past year. I think I had maybe a half dozen shoots total over the past 8 months, including that film that I produced and directed. And I would say in a similar time frame, I'd probably have like 30 or 40 different shoots, like 1 or 2 day things or a week-long thing here and there. There's just not as much work, or a lot of it is being done the way this is being done right now. I have friends of mine who they do a lot of sort of corporate, interviews with doctors and things like that, or documentary interviews. And rather than sending a crew to go and do those things, they'll do it on Zoom. They'll record the Zoom feed, and they'll go and shoot B-roll and things like that still, but they'll just use this as the way to get the voiceover, get the interview, get the content. And audiences forgive a lot of that. Like we especially now, we have so much more of an acceptance of what a Zoom call looks like and how that fits into just the way we digest media and content in general. So there's a lot more of that and a lot less of the types of stuff that I traditionally would do as a freelancer. That's a very long-winded answer to that question, but the answer is, yeah, it's changed a lot, and I focus on different things, but I still have to be out there. I mean, we're filmmakers. We have to be out there.
That's a really great, good answer, thorough answer. I want to kind of follow up on what you talked about with the idea that this Zoom has become more accepting and audiences are more forgiving. As a professional, as a filmmaker, what do you think that does to the industry, job opportunities in industry? Is that going to hurt, help, or looking forward maybe 1 year to 5 years once we're through all this?
Well, I think that's obviously a very complicated answer, in that, like, I look at, so one of the classes I teach about, that's called Cinematographers at Work. And one of the lectures, I talk about the transition from film to digital, and how we were filming on film cameras, on film, editing on film. And, you start to trickle in, well, now we're shooting on film, but we're digitizing it and we're editing on a computer. And now we're doing color grading. So we're sending it through a digital intermediate and then sending it back to film. And well, now we're shooting on digital, but the cameras kind of suck. But now we're shooting on digital and the cameras are improving. And now we're only shooting on digital, and maybe 5% of movies now are shot on film. And that's a budget consideration, and it's this. And now there's all these other cameras that are out there that they're, this can shoot 4K, like crazy stuff. That all of those things, they impact some parts of the industry negatively. Obviously, there are very few film processing labs that exist now in the United States or in the world. And there are several people who they made their living as cinematographers shooting on film and now had to adapt to this new digital landscape. But cinematographers do and have adapted to that. And the best cinema, like, Roger Deakins is an example, who shot, Blade Runner in 1917, but also shot like The Shawshank Redemption and No Country for Old Men, and very big film champion, for a long time. But he was able to adapt and shoot on, digital cameras from that point. I think the answer sort of lies in that, the industry is going to change, and the industry, like, has always had those changes. And so the answer just becomes, how are we adapting to that? And so just because we're on Zoom doesn't mean that I can't still take advantage of using other cameras besides the one that's on my computer. And even, my setup here is like, well, this is my desk, but I hung an LED softbox right here. I've got a microphone that's like hanging up over the computer. So from a standpoint of thinking about how valuable expertise is and just making things look nicer, that's still something that's crucial. Is like, people still need it. Just because it's Zoom doesn't mean it has to look like crap. Like, it can look better, and you can go. I was guest lecturing, and my colleague Bill had set up his Epic and had run an HDMI feed from his Epic into his computer. So his Zoom feed was a really beautifully lit, shallow depth of field, like, shot with, an Epic. And that, like, showed, and his point in doing that was to show them, look, like, the way you capture material still matters. Like, even if it's going to Zoom, like, there's a way of presenting it in a way that still forces you as a filmmaker to think about the effect that this has versus another camera has. So all that's still, like, useful. Like, all the knowledge you get from that is still useful. It just means, well, now there are opportunities for live streaming events like this one or others. Or I've seen several filmmakers who have done Zoom specific digital web series, where it's they're either set during COVID, or they're about, distant learning, or they're about, still family dramas. I'm teaching a directing 2 class this quarter that's all about, like, how do you inject drama into situations when it's really just a conversation between 2 people over Zoom, which is out of necessity, but this is part of our zeitgeist now. This is part of the way that we understand people interact. And filmmaking and telling stories is about that. It's about how people connect with each other, interact with one another, and conflict with one another. You can do that over Zoom. Like, I do that over Zoom all the time. And so I think that's just, it changes the types of stories that get told. It changes the expertises that you require, like the education you need. Like, we're always learning. Like, as filmmakers, we're always learning. So you have to find ways to learn something else. I've just picked up one of these, like, the Elgato, like, cam links, so I can stream a movie at the same time that I'm giving commentary on it, that sort of thing. Screen capturing. And that's something, like, this sort of thing is like things that gamers know a ton about, because they're always live streaming and on Twitch and things like that. I've never had to do that stuff before, but now because of this, I'm having to learn that sort of stuff. So I think there's a real opportunity there for anyone who is, just graduating, who's scared, oh my gosh, am I ever going to get to make movies, or am I ever going to get to do what I want to do? Well, yeah, it just might look a little different for a while. And so that requires you to educate yourself in ways that prepare you for that. What does that interactive video look like? What does VR look like? What does, talking to people in live streaming events on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or something like that look like? I think it presents a lot of opportunity for people to sort of fill those holes in a lot of companies' content creation, and maybe do it for them in a way that's cheaper than what they've been able to do it for before, maybe they have other opportunities now because of that. Their marketing budgets wouldn't allow them to make a $50,000 commercial, but maybe it'll let them do a $5,000 live streaming event. And that's a gateway. Like, that's a gateway for students to kind of get into that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, but I think it's definitely, it changes, and not everyone benefits from that. It's just a question of what position you can put yourself in.
Yeah, that's good perspective. I think back to when we got started, and I'm not the video film person, but I've been around it since college. And my husband's background, he was at the radio station, so he was splicing audio tape and splicing. I mean, when you think back to that, and I think about our first cameras we bought with the business, and how much they were and then what we can buy now, like, yeah, it's just unbelievable. In the edit suite that took up, actually, the room I'm in now used to be the big studio, and now the studio is a much smaller room because
Yeah.
it's literally the laptop, and it's there's lighting and stuff like that, but just for what they're doing, it's just the needs are different. You don't have this huge desk with this edit suite and all these monitors and stuff we have. Yeah, it's just different.
I
The
learned
monitors can hang on the wall now. I mean, it's just so much is different.
Yeah, I mean, like, I learned how to edit on a Steenbeck, 16 mil, just unspooling film and cutting the magnetic tape and then splicing it all together. But like, what was great about that for me was that, like, it taught you, that all these things that you think about in Final Cut Pro or in Premiere, new bin, well, bins, they were literally, you hung film over a bin. Like, that's the reason it's like, it prepares you in a way for the methodology of why editing works the way it does. And I shot on film. I am infinitely appreciative of the fact that I've shot on film, because it makes you think about the process and the discipline a little differently. But I know people who have never shot on film, and they're extraordinary cinematographers.
Right.
I think it's naive of us, and maybe a little elitist of us, to say, well, this is the only way you can learn how to do that correctly.
Right.
And so I think that's part of this is, the pandemic has accelerated all of these things.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge, is people, I think, are scared because maybe we would have had like 5 years to slowly adapt to this sort of landscape that we're in. But we had 2 months.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Like, here we are. Let's go. No, exactly. Ryan, before I jump in with another question, do you have a question you'd like to ask?
Actually, yeah. What do you do for music if you want to add to your film? Do you have to worry about copyright in any way?
It depends on where you go. I mean, like, this is, I'm lucky in the sense that I know multiple composers who are really phenomenal composers, but that costs money. And so it depends on how much, where your budget's at. I am also happy that I can play some of my own music. I'm also, like, just in terms of seeking out bands and people who are not necessarily looking for extensive payments for things. It's just you find contacts and get them to give it to you for a song, or you barter for them. Hey, give me this song to use in my movie, and I'll shoot a music video for you. There's a lot of that bartering that goes around in the indie world. But a lot of what I've seen other editors do, and I don't edit very much. I confess that I hate editing immensely. I love the process. It's where the dream happens, where the magic happens. But I want somebody else to be doing that magic. I don't want to be doing the magic. But the editors I know, they use a lot of stock music, where you can subscribe to different websites for a very small amount every month, and you get access to their entire royalty-free database for whatever it is that you're doing. It could be corporate work, it could be narrative work, etc. And that helps a lot. And because when whatever service you subscribe to, I mean, it runs the gamut. The types of stuff you can just search for, and search for a keyword, like you could search for romance, you could search for peppy corporate, and you would find hundreds of songs that had been written that have different vibes. You can crossfade between, and you can change the sort of mood of things. So there's a lot of ways that you can go down that route. And there are a lot of just simply royalty-free sites where you don't even have to subscribe. You go to music, musicians have websites where you say, hey, You know, they'll have a disclaimer on their website, say all this is royalty free, please download it, I only ask under like Creative Commons that you credit me as such. And on a lot of my student films, when I was getting my MFA, I would just go and look for those people, and I would download, you know, I'd find them on SoundCloud, or I'd find them, you know, elsewhere. And that you just download that music and you use it in your film wherever you need that sort of background stuff. So there's a lot of ways you can kind of approach that, but really it's just searching and finding the right systems, like the right services that work for you, because you're going to find ones like, oh yeah, I just like this style of music, so I'm going to find that. I don't know if that answers your question, but there's a lot of resources out there for that stuff.
Do you know of any? Do you have a few suggestions of sites that could provide music like that?
I don't, because I don't like bookmark them ever, which is bad of me. But it is pretty straightforward to just like go on Google and search royalty-free music, and you will find a number of big sites that will pop up. What was Pond 5 is always the one that I feel like comes up for a lot of people. And Pond 5 is a big, like, sort of conglomeration of all of those different types of stock things. And I think they don't just do music. I think Pond 5 does like stock photos and video and stuff as well. A lot of these places will do all of the above. Like they'll have ones that are music only, but you'll have ones that are music, photos, video, and it's all stock stuff. But I just don't know any off the top of my head because I'm a horrible person.
Yeah, I can hop in. The one Steve's used some and I've used for stuff I've worked on. And I'm kind of mixed on it. I think his price point, and then he's got all these credits built up in it. So I don't even think we're paying for it right now. But some of the stuff I used for some of the C videos that were credits we were using. But so is Audio Hero. Again, some of the stuff's good. Some of it's not. Selections. We used to, when you talk about how things change, and I can't even remember the company. We used to, you could buy the CD sets, like, and you'd buy these different ones and have them. And whatever company that I think almost everything we had from them, we really liked. I mean, it was very, very good done. Where Audio here is kind of hit and miss, at least in my opinion, with it.
I think that's the truth, though, is that like all stock videos, all stock music sites are super hit or miss. Like, and the thing that's like, the thing I found valuable about working with actual composers, and it's good to sort of go to specifically, like, if not to say that like it's like, oh well, they're students so they're cheaper. It's the reality is that they are, but you still need to pay them. That's kind of an important thing. And typically with composers, I'll pay by the minute. Like you'll pay for if you need 4 minutes of music, you pay them, $150 for a minute of music. But what will happen usually is like you can find students who are really fresh and really raw talent. And the great thing about having a composer that's you're working with is it becomes something that you're actually timing to the images. And stock music is kind of just like, well, that's the rhythm. That's what you got. So you almost have to like use it not in the way you would want to traditionally use music, where there's this groundswell of emotion here, and there's a beat here that I want, and there's a beat here, and boom, boom, boom. Like, you can't do that when it's stock music. Stock music's just like the same it's like the same flat bed of music that you put under everything. And so what happens really is you as an editor wind up spending more time searching for the right stock music. And you'll go through 200 clips and you still wind up finding something that's like, this is all right, I guess it's fine. But like, that's what you pay a composer for, is so you're not taking the time to do that. You're really just somebody cater the music directly to the story and the visuals and the rhythm that you need it to. And that is more expensive, some $10 a month versus $200 a minute. Like, there is a clear difference there. But I've found that every time it's worth it, if that makes sense. And that's something you just budget into your, into your RFPs, is you just say, listen, you want this to sound good, we need a composer. It's going to cost you $600. You'll thank me. And you just got to pitch it that way. And if they still say no, well, then yeah, you have other options to fall back on. But don't start with the stock music. Stock music
Yeah.
can be your fallback for later on.
Yeah, I love that. I'm thinking back to some of our projects, and when they did the TV show, that's what there was a local band my husband knew, and that's what he went, loved the sound, loved it, and envisioned, could envision him singing kind of the intro song, right? And so we went to him, and it was great, it was perfect, it was, then your own sound, your own everything, and we came to an agreement what we paid him, and I can't remember how we did it, but I think we paid him up front, and then maybe every year it was on or something, and we used it. We continued to, pay him something for that.
Yeah, and
So
that's
yeah,
a lot of work. Like that is like not an insignificant thing to like keep up
right.
with that sort of thing and say, okay, well, this commercial's going to play this many times, and so we'll send you royalties, or the movie's going to get distribution, and so yeah, you have to keep track of those things, and that's not always the most fun. But the thing about filmmaking is it's a business too, and so you have to be aware of all of those things. I mean, for Chrysalis, the film I was talking about earlier, we we got a distribution deal. We would get a check in the mail every like few months or so, and every time we got one of those checks, we'd deposit it, and then I'd write 20 other checks and put together little Excel spreadsheets that were little sort of invoices. Hey, you get 10% of that, you get 2% of that, you get 5% of that. Thanks for working on the movie. And that's awesome that you get to do that, but it requires you to be more methodical and more organized than you thought you might have to be as a filmmaker who just wants to make art. Well, you're also running the books. And so you got to learn some of that too.
All right, I want to ask a little bit about crowdfunding, or let's step it back, even just financing the film. So you have, you talked about two $35,000, budget films. For somebody who's looking to do their very first film, how do you start to fundraise for it, and how solid should your budget be, I guess, too, even before going into it, and some of that. So kind of maybe a little on the budget development into then how you get that funded, or ways to get it funded.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of ways to think about this too, because it goes to the very basic element of what do you want your film to be? Where do you want it to go? If your goal is to get some kind of big distribution deal, you know, one that affects the movie you're making in the first place, because there are certain movies that sell better than others, and two, that affects who you cast, right? And there are certain name actors that will get your movie sold faster than actors that don't have those kinds of big credits, but those actors cost significantly more. You may want that actor and put that actor on the poster, but that actor is going to cost you $100,000 for 3 days of work. That changes the calculus a little bit. So you have to sort of decide just what your intention is with the movie in the first place. Most of the movies that we made not really thinking we were going to make millions of dollars on those movies, right? We wanted to make the movie because we loved the story, and we wanted to cast who we wanted to cast, have that sort of creative freedom. And, after that, if the movie went to festivals, if the movie got some kind of distribution where it was out there in the world, that was exciting for us. We would have liked to maybe make our money back, and that means there's sort of like what I would like to term a no man's land for budgets. Is if you make a movie that's in like the $200,000 to $500,000 range, you are in a situation where you don't have enough money to hire a big name actor to come on board and sell that movie, but you're also spending too much money to be able to just self-distribute it and make a few $1,000s and make your costs back. Really, anything like above six figures, there's a lot more organization that has to go into that. So most of the movies that we've done have been in that sort of $30,000 to $50,000 range, where that sounds like a lot of money, but it's not necessarily something that will destroy me if we don't like. I can eventually pay that off, or we can eventually figure something else out. And there's a lot of different ways to think about how you're going to go about getting that money. I mean, you can go and start an LLC. And you should do that anyway. Like, really, like the first thing you should do always is have some sort of organizing body that film falls under. And a limited liability company keeps you from saying, well, we lost money on this movie, therefore I have to sell my house. Like, a limited liability company shields you from that. Like, that's an important aspect of this. But once you do that, you have to decide, well, am I going to go the traditional route of like going to investors and raising money? And if you were going to do that, you search for contacts, you look at the credits of other movies, you go to family and friends, all that kind of stuff. But you would put together a business plan for that. You would put together your budget. You probably would have multiple tiers of budgets. I tend to put together a low, mid, and high budget. The high is like the dream. I'd love to have this much money to make this movie and buy this gear and hire this actor. But if we need to make the movie for a third of that, I can do it. It's just going to look like this instead of that. But then you also look at, well, what are the success stories? What are the ones that I want to emulate? What is the movie supposed to sort of feel like? So every movie I've ever raised money for, we've put together a teaser for that movie, like just a little trailer that is more mood driven than anything, but gets an idea of what the film's going to be, what it could be, across to the investors. And that all goes in kind of a packet along with the script. And I say, well, here's all this info. It's the same thing you would do if you were starting a restaurant and looking for investors to help you start a restaurant, where you've got to prove to that investor that you know how to run a restaurant and that you're the right person for that. Like, really, the business plan is partly about selling the movie, but it's also about selling yourself and making sure that you're putting your best foot forward. But then after that, it becomes, well, if I have investors, I have to pay them back. And so that changes the calculus of, the decisions you make and things like that. What was always beneficial to us and exciting for us about crowdfunding was it wasn't about that, because you with crowdfunding, you're not paying back your investors. Your investors are paying for products. They're paying for a DVD. They're paying for a shirt. They're paying for a signed poster. They're paying for tickets to the premiere. You're basically doing this elaborate pre-order process for all of the things before the movie gets made, so you can raise the money to make the things that you're going to give to them, which is also like a perfectly viable way. I mean, like Indiegogo and Kickstarter, they don't just have films on them. They have comic books, they have games, they have inventions, like Fitbits and things like that, where like there's similar sort of things where people had an idea and they put it out there and said, do you want this? If so, give us $200 and you'll be the first one to get it. And that's like the way that they raise their money. So there's ways of just thinking about it in that sense. But as far as like the construction of the budget itself, it goes down to like, and you get better at this the more that you do it, because I sucked at it for a really long time. But you learn how to say, well, you break down the script, you look at all the key elements of the script, and then you say, well, okay, based on that, I can shoot this movie in 18 days, or I can shoot this movie in 5 days. And I need at least these crew members. I need a DP. I need a production designer. I need a first AD to help with the scheduling and running things on set. I need a sound person who's going to help mix everything. I need a post team, my editor, my sound mixer, my colorist. I need all these things. And I tend to think of the budget in two ways. I tend to think of it as the get the movie in the can budget and get the movie done budget. Get the movie in the can means, well, if at least we get the movie, if all else fails, I'm not saying I'll like it, but I can edit this movie. I can learn how to do those things. But the getting it in the can requires a certain number of people, a certain level of resources that I can't be everywhere at once, And you always sort of think about it's like there's always the triangle that everyone always talks about, fast, cheap, and good. You get to pick two. If you want to get the movie done fast and you want it to be cheap, well, it's probably not going to be good. If you want it to get done fast and you want it to be good, it's probably going to be really expensive, right? And if you want it to be cheap and you want it to be good, that's fine, but it's going to take you several years to get it done. And there's the movies rife with stories of like how that happens. So it's just deciding what your priorities are and what you feel like you need versus what you think you want. There's a lot of that goes into the process of figuring out the budget side of things. And then you have to raise that money. And that's the whole crowdfunding kind of thing, is figuring out, well, you still are doing the same things that you would do if you were going to traditional investors, right? You still have to come up with a business plan. You still have to prove to however many backers you need to make that movie that you're the person they should trust, because there's a lot of trust that goes into crowdfunding. Like, I've backed crowdfunding campaigns before, and as soon as you put your credit card info in, you're like, well, there goes. I hope the movie gets made, because otherwise I just threw away $50. Literally just burned it. I just burned it and threw it in the internet, and hopefully it comes back to me in some form later on. But you don't know. I mean, there are times when crowdfunding campaigns raise their money and then they don't make anything, and you're out. Like, you made a bad business decision investing in that movie. And that's the way that Kickstarter tends to frame those things. But that means, as a person who is running a crowdfunding campaign, you're selling yourself, and that they should trust you with their money, that you're going to make that movie. And so you still have to show them how organized you are. You still have to put together that trailer. You still have to put together updates. And in reality, it becomes even more about that. As much as it's about making money and raising money, it becomes more about the conversation that you're having with your potential backers. You're sending them new content. You're putting together new behind the scenes stuff. Even after the crowdfunding campaign is done, we would send out updates through the Kickstarter campaign every day of filming, during the pre-production process, during post, when the premiere was coming up. Like, it becomes a marketing tool for you reaching out to who are essentially your biggest fans, because they're the people who liked you and gave money to you before you were awesome. And so that's that crowdfunding has to be looked at less as a fundraising tool, although it is that. It has to be looked at in the planning and in the execution of it as more like the first step in a very long marketing campaign to your true fans, and making sure that you're thanking them for everything and asking questions and getting answers and giving answers, and not spamming them with unnecessary stuff. Like, think about what you would want if you were donating to a movie. What would you want to get out of that? It's not just about the movie. It's about, I got to invest in the movie. And so there's perks and fun that come with that, that give people a little slice of what that means. So it's about that sort of emotional investment as much as it is about the monetary investment.
No, that's great. I've never thought about it as, I mean, I've heard about all the pieces, and kind of the marketing piece of it, but you're right. It's the long story of, or long process of marketing to them and keeping them connected, and I think with the crowdfunding, the thing that's important is, if you're crowdfunding this film and you hope someday down the road to crowdfund another one, you want to you want to deliver on the first one, because they're going to be the first people to probably step up, if you did your job well, to step up for the next one. So it's, to keep that in mind too. We've got time probably for like one more question or some wrap up thoughts on it. So Ryan, I want to offer to you, if you've got one last question you'd kind of like to ask, to go ahead and do that.
One question I had was that, what type of microphones do you use to record sound? Do you use like microphones that you can attach to your shirt, or do you use like microphones that are like on a stand above the person?
Well, so that depends on what you're doing. This is, and I confess to not being like an audio expert. I'm good enough to be a one-man band for, interview B-roll type stuff. But there's a tool for every job. If you're a podcaster, you've got a different kind of microphone. If you are, even if you're a sound mixer, something I was always very struck by when I would be on film sets, when I was DPing, but I would see the sound mixers, the crazy thing, like let's look at this from like a perspective of, there's a film I did about 3 or 4 years ago called Teacher, that was a fairly sizable budget film, and you can go see it. It's on Amazon Prime. It's a great movie. David Desmalchian, Kevin Pollak, shot in the Chicago suburbs. Like, really proud of that movie. But the mixer and the team, the audio team that was on that film, we had multiple boom mic operators on given days, because if you have multiple people in a conversation, let's say you have 3 people that are talking to one another around a table, for example, the typical low budget way of doing that is twofold. You're going to give a microphone to every single person, called a lav microphone, and that's what you're talking about, clipping one to their person, whether it's their clothes or somewhere else. And then you also have a boom mic operator, where it's someone with a boom pole doing the thing where they're holding the mic up and it's, you know, pointed down at the people who are talking, but they're just above the line of the camera, the frame. And what I noticed was, like, on this production, was they were doing that for every single actor. They were putting a lav mic on every single actor, and they hide them in such specific ways. They're flesh colored tape, flesh colored microphones. They're running them up the back and around, down, and like through specific parts of their clothing so they don't show, the cables don't show up, or they're hiding the packs in the, like, their pants. Just like ways to like make sure that they don't, like, you don't see them. One of my favorite little things is like on I don't know if you saw Lost when it was on TV, but the series finale of Lost, I remember, like, you know, a main character is like walking to eventually their death, but like as he's getting out of the river, you see this gigantic, like, rectangular pack hanging out of his pants, and you're like, oh shoot, they couldn't hide the mic well enough. Those are the types of considerations you have to have when you're, you know, thinking about narrative films, is because, you know, people have to do other things and they can't, you know, that suspension of disbelief is so important. But anyway, so no, like, to that end, like, I was surprised not only with the lav mics that they were doing for every person, but also that they had multiple boom mic operators. So they would divide up the rooms. Like, okay, boom mic operator, you're taking these two people over here. Boom mic operator 2, you're taking these two people here. And if they were outside, they would use one type of shotgun microphone. And if they were inside, they would use a different type of shotgun microphone, and they would put a different sleeve over it, or they would put a different, you know, windscreen over it, depending on what the weather was like. So it goes in not even just like preference of what microphone, whether it's a boom or a lav. Ideally, you want both because they pick up sound differently. Like a lav mic is going to catch sort of the bassiness of your chest at the same time that it's reading the sound of your voice. And so that feels like a little lower frequency than a shotgun microphone that's carrying the treble sort of part of it, but also will pick up the echo of the floor if it's a hard floor. It's like every microphone is going to pick up slightly different attributes. That's why it's important to have both, because from like just a surround sound perspective, we want as much to work with as possible within that. But to say, well, okay, if I'm just one person and I'm going back and forth, I can't reasonably get everybody at once. So I was always sort of shell shocked. Wow, I've got two people recording those two channels to different people, and then you've got like, so our mixer had like a 16 channel mixer, and at least half of those channels were full. He was listening to all of the audio from every microphone at any given time and modulating and mixing each of them individually from one another, because then that gave the editing team more latitude later on to say, I want that track, but I don't want that one because there was a bump on the microphone, or the lav mic had some static, or this bit didn't sound clear because a train went by, but the lav mic caught it okay. It just gives you that versatility. And I find that even for me, just as a one-man band, having a lav mic and a boom mic on a stand for every interview that I conduct saves me so much hassle and stress later on. So I mean, realistically, both. It's about whatever the situation calls for. A lav mic is something you can always put on anyone, as if it's a wireless lav, I mean, especially. But you always want the boom microphone in the event that something else happens. You know, there's always going to be times when both are required. So I hope that answers your question. That there's audio is so much more complex and crazy than I have ever cared to dive into.
Oh, that's great. Any other last tip? We can kind of wrap it up here. Any last comment or tip that you would want to give to somebody who's looking, you know, to get into this field, into this area, or maybe they're in it and just looking how to keep moving forward?
Well, for people who are just getting in it, especially now, because obviously the pandemic is just is crazy, and it's challenging. It's going to be challenging to find jobs. I mean, I was in the same boat. I mean, I graduated, and 2 years later the Great Recession started, and so as a freelancer, that's a horrible time to be a freelancer. It really is about just, searching for those opportunities. And I was going onto Craigslist and sending emails to every single TV, film, video job posting and every radio, TV, film gig that was out there. I worked for free on a lot of stuff when I was starting out. That's not ideal, and you should fight for getting whatever you can money wise, because food, copy, and credit doesn't pay rent. But you have to build up enough street cred, enough of a reel, and enough contacts. And realistically, like, once you get a job, even if it's a job you're working on for free, you work on that job as though you're making $1,000 a day. You work as hard as you possibly can on that one job, because you never know if that person 6 years down the line is going to say, hey, I remember what you did on that. Can you come shoot this for me? I'll pay you $1,000 a day to do it. And that's happened to me before, where I've done something for free for somebody for dirt cheap, and they've come back and they've brought me work for the next 7 years after that. And that's happened to some of my best clients. So it's important to look at it that way and say, like, listen, search for work wherever it is. If you can afford to take free work, great. If you can afford to only take just cheap work, like, whatever you can do to build up those credentials, and work those jobs like you're getting paid what you're actually worth, because that pays off. Like, you're doing the legwork now to pay that off several years down the line. That makes now much more stressful and much harder. But it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with opportunities is, you're not going to be able to get on set for a while, potentially, because those sets have become much more insulated and really like sort of bubbles of their own. But that means you can find other ways of putting content out there. You can find other ways of, contributing to other companies' needs from a social media perspective, from a marketing and content perspective. You have to kind of think outside the box and say, well, how can I do something that's tangential to what I want to do, but still gives me skill sets that I can use in the narrative stuff down the line? That's really what I would say is, like, keep an eye out for those opportunities and try to think outside the box a little bit on that.
I couldn't agree more, because I think that's definitely the name of the game. And I love the idea about, even when you're working for free, to treat it like you're working for $1,000 a day, because that reputation will carry forward and pay off in the future for sure. We've experienced it. I think if you talk to anybody, they'll experience, if you work like you're working for free, probably they'll ask you back maybe for free again, but that's even a maybe, I would say. So with that, so yeah, wonderful, John. Ryan, thank you for joining us. Those who watch
Thanks, Ryan.
this, those who watch later, I'm sure they're going to find this great information very valuable. Again, Ryan, you had some great questions, so we really appreciate those with that. And John, thank you so much. And I wish I'd say happy rest of the day, but I think you're grading. So hopefully it's good grading and fun and easy, and the work is great by the students. So there you go.
It is, and thank you. And this has been awesome. So I really appreciate it, as always.
Yep. Well, good. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, Ryan.